Hello everyone. So what I'm gonna do in this tutorial, I'm gonna discuss how you can use the Punnett square ultimately to predict the outcome of different genetic crossing that you can do. So I discussed this in the lecture about Mendelian genetics, but just to remind you, the Punnett square, what it's all about is nothing else than a graphic method to basically predict what will be the generations of the genetic makeup, so the genotype, the phenotype, and the ratio between phenotypes of that you will get if you cross two individual of known genetic phenotype, genetic makeup, so genotype. So here you have an example on the bottom. This was what we used in the lecture on Mendelian genetics, and this was a result of the crossing of two heterozygous plants for the color of the flowers. So as you can see, again, this is a Punnett square, allows you to predict the genetic makeup of the offspring here. Not only that, it allows you to also predict the frequency of the makeup based on the frequency of the gametes containing one allele versus the other. Once you have all of that, then you can predict the phenotype. So knowing which allele is dominant over the other allow you to figure out that these plants are, for example, all purple, and the ratio of purple plants, so of a certain phenotype versus another one. So let's go through some example of these questions. So first of all, how do we tackle these questions? Well, there are different steps that you can follow. You can do it in different ways, but what I would recommend is, first of all, try to sort out what is the genotype of the parents. Sometimes the genotype is given to you, sometimes you have to infer it. So, for example, if you're told that a plant has a recessive phenotype, you can immediately infer the genotype by knowing that that recessive phenotype can be given only if the plant is homozygous recessive for that phenotype, for that specific character, sorry. So can be given to you or you can infer it. We'll see it in some example. Once you have the genetic makeup of the parents, now you got to figure out what is the possible combination and their frequency of the alleles in the different gametes. Okay, so you might know that half of them will contain one allele, half another one, or all of them would have the same allele. You got to figure that out. That's key. Once you have that two information, so once you have the information about the genetic content in the gametes of the two parents, now you're ready to generate the Punnett square. So you put the possible gametes from one parent on one side. Let's put parent number 1 here or 2 here. You can do it either way. Once you have it there, then you can predict the crossing. So imagine you have two type of gametes here and two type of gametes here. Now then you can predict, so you will know the frequency. Half of them will be with this capital P, half with the small p. The same thing here. That's the heterozygous crossing that was done by Mendel. So you can predict the genetic makeup of the offspring that will come from the fusion of this gamete with this gamete. So you would have now these two alleles will get together, and the frequency will be the product of the frequencies of the two gametes. So it will be 1 in 4. You can do the same for all the other, and based on the genetic makeup and the concept of dominance, you can figure out what will be the phenotypes of all the combination and the relative ratio. Okay, let's go through some example. This first example, this is about the length of the hair in cats. So cats can have long or short hair, and long hair is dominant. So the allele carrying long hair can be written as a capital L, and that's dominant over the short hair, which is then the allele carrying short hair is written as a small l. I changed the L so it's easier to read it. Now the crossing. So you have one heterozygous cat, so cat number 1 in the parental generation here will be heterozygous. So it means it has the two types of alleles. It's crossed with a short hair cat. In this case, the genotype is not given to you, but you can infer it. Since it has short hair, and the short hair is related to the recessive allele, the only way a cat can have short hair is if it is homozygous recessive. So we know that now parent number 2 is homozygous recessive. Great. Now the question is, what is the probability of one of their offspring, so one of the product of the crossing has long hair? What is the probability? What fraction would it have? So let's do the Punnett square. First step, what possible gametes can you get out of there? So for parent number 1, so cat number 1 here, you may have that each gamete can have either the long hair allele, so the dominant allele, so half of them would have that, and half could get the short hair allele. Sorry, the pen is giving a big hard time. For the parent number 2 now, since it has only one type of allele, all the gamete would have this short hair allele. Okay, so now we have all that information to generate the Punnett square. So let's make it here. So on one side, we'll put the gametes from parent number 1. On the other one, the gametes from the parent number 2. So 2 possible gametes from parent number 1, one containing the long hair allele, the dominant one, and half of them would have it. The other half would have the short hair allele. For parent number 2 now, all the alleles would have all the gametes would have the short allele here. It doesn't like the short allele for some reason, some part. So we can just predict. There is no need, only one of them. Let's predict what is the possible combination you can get. So what you would get is that now at this point, half of the offspring, sorry, the pen is not working all the time. I'm not sure. Half of the offspring in some areas particularly, the genetic makeup will be a heterozygous makeup. This pen is driving me crazy. And the other half here would have a homozygous recessive makeup, right? So in terms of phenotype, why it doesn't keep it? This is driving me crazy. It's not even keeping it. So half, let's write it back here somehow. Okay, so that's what would have been there. For some reason, it doesn't take it in some areas on my screen. So in terms of phenotype, now these would have long hair because they have the dominant allele there. In this case, it's homozygous recessive, like parent number 2, that would have short hair. Which, now going back to the question, the probability of one of the 2 offspring having long hair, so half of them would have long hair, so 50% would have long hair. The question is answered. Now, example number 2. In this case, doesn't even tell you the character is about, but it's telling you that now you have a dihybrid cross between 2 individuals that are identical to each other genetically, and they're both heterozygous for 2 different characters in this case. One which is represented by the letter S, capital or small, the other one by the letter Y, capital or small. Now the question is, what fraction of the offspring will be homozygous for both traits? So what does homozygous means? It means that it has 2 copies, 2 identical copies, 2 identical alleles for each character. All right. So the possible combination you can have, these will be homozygous for dominant allele for the first character and homozygous for the dominant allele for the second one. These would meet the definition there. The other possibility is that they are homozygous dominant for one character and homozygous recessive for the other one. Let's make a difference there if the pen lets me do it. Or the other way around, homozygous recessive for the first one, homozygous dominant for the second one. They are all homozygous, right? And finally, they can be homozygous recessive for both. So how many of the offsprings will be with this genetic makeup? Great. So we already have now the genetic makeup for the parents. So parental, this is the genetic makeup. That's the crossing you're doing. So now we have to figure out what possible gametes can you get from these parents. Each parent will produce the same type with the same frequencies. So since they're both with the same genetic makeup, now what possible combination can you get for it? So you have the allele for the first character, this can combine with this, or it can combine with this, right? So that's one possibility, S capital Y or S small y. Second possibility is now this allele can go with this or with this. So each gamete obviously would have one copy, one allele for each character. So capital Y or both small ones. All right, and the same thing will be for the other parents, their same genetic makeup. So now we have the information. We would have 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. You know, all the gametes are equally represented. So we can actually generate at this point the Punnett square. So whereby what we do here, we put the possible gametes for one parent on one side and the possible gametes for the other parent on the other side. So they're the same thing. So just to give enough room here for the possible combination, I'll make it a bit larger on this one. So you have S capital Y here, S small y, small s capital Y here, and small s small y here. And try to make it clear what is capital, what is not there. Same thing on the other parent, they're genetically identical. Now we know that each one of them is 1/4. Okay, I won't write it for all of them, but we know that each product will be 1/16 in the end. So capital S small y, small s here, and capital Y. Ignore that part. And this is small s small y. For some reason, my left side of the screen doesn't like it. Oh, right side, sorry. And now let's predict and see which one will be homozygous for. So now each of this combination here that we produce here will be 1/16 because this is 1/4, 1/4. So each one of them is 1/16. So I'm not going to write it 1/16 in all of them. So the first possible combination will be at this point, capital S, capital S, capital Y, capital Y. These will be already meeting the definition of one of them. Second combination, S, capital S, big Y, small y. So these will be heterozygous for the second character. So it doesn't really match the description there of what we're looking for. This one now will be heterozygous for the first character and homozygous dominant for the second one. Still doesn't meet the definition. So these will be heterozygous for both. Doesn't meet the definition. Let's go to the second row. Homozygous dominant for this, heterozygous for the second one. Doesn't meet the definition. Homozygous dominant for the first character, homozygous recessive for the second one. This meets the definition. That's another one. So 1/16, 1/16. These will be heterozygous for the first, heterozygous for the second. Doesn't meet the definition, what we're looking for. And now these will be heterozygous for the first, homozygous recessive for the second one. Doesn't meet the definition. Has to be homozygous for both of them, right? So this will be heterozygous for the first one. We already know doesn't meet the definition. Homozygous dominant for the second one. Doesn't meet the definition. Heterozygous for the first one. And heterozygous for the second one too. Doesn't meet the definition. These will be homozygous recessive for the first one, homozygous dominant for the first one. Meets the definition. Another one. So right now we're at 3/16 so far. These will be homozygous recessive for the first one, heterozygous for the second one. Doesn't meet the definition. And this will be heterozygous for the first one, heterozygous for the second one. Doesn't meet the definition. Heterozygous for the first one, homozygous recessive for the second one, still doesn't meet the definition. Homozygous recessive for the first one, heterozygous for the second one, doesn't meet the definition. And the last one instead will be homozygous recessive for the first one, homozygous recessive for the second one too, is the definition. So that's say now we can answer the question. What fraction of the offspring will be homozygous for both traits? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 out of 16, or 1 in 4, will be homozygous for both traits. Answer the question. Third example here. So now, this is about tomatoes. Yummy. Specifically for an Italian too. Okay, so now it's about the two characters are the color of the fruit, that can be yellow, and that's recessive, or red, and that's dominant, and the height. So if a plant is dwarf, there is a recessive allele for dwarf and a dominant allele for tall. So now you have the question here. What is the crossing? A homozygous dominant red and tall plant. So this is dominant for both the color of the fruit and the height. So this is red. So this will be the parental generation. Plant number 1 is homozygous dominant for both. It's crossed with a heterozygous red. So we know that for the color of the fruit, it's heterozygous, and dwarf plant. Dwarf plant, this is not specified whether it's recessive or not, but we know it's recessive. It must be recessive because dwarf is carried by the recessive allele. So the only way a plant can be recessive, be with a recessive phenotype, so dwarf, it means that it has to be homozygous recessive. So this will be the genetic makeup, again, inferred for the second plant. Okay, so with the Punnett square, we have to answer these 3 questions. What percent of the offspring will be heterozygous for both characters? What is the phenotype ratio? And what fraction of the offspring will have yellow fruit and dwarf ones? So first of all, gametes. What possible combination can we find in the gametes? Well, for the first plant, no matter what is the combination, 1, 2, you end up having the same. So all the gametes will carry the dominant form of the color of the fruit and the dominant allele for the height of the plant. For the second one, you can have 2 possible combinations. These can combine with this or this, given the same type of gamete, with the dominant form for the color of the plant, or the tomatoes, and the recessive allele for the height. And the second one, type of gamete, would have both recessive form for both characters. Okay. Great, we're ready to do our Punnett square. Simple one. So now in this case, so for parent 1, we can put it on this side right here, since I don't have room. So that's the gamete, possible gametes. All of them are T for parent number 1. For parent number 2 here, we have half of them would be capital R small t, half of them would be with the recessive forms of both. What are the possible offspring you can get? So half of them will have a genotype homozygous dominant for the first one and heterozygous for the second one. And the other half will be heterozygous for the first character, so the color of the fruit, and heterozygous or so for the height of the plant. So first question, what percent of offspring will be heterozygous for both characters? Well, this one right here. So half of them, or 50%, if you want to talk about percentage. What is the phenotype ratio now that you get? It's 1:1 between the heterozygous and the other one. So it will be 1:1 in terms of, so you would have 1, which is red and tall, versus the red and tall. So, which means in reality it's not 1:1. The genotype is 1:1, but it's 100%. There is no real ratio. 100% will be red and tall. They all have the same phenotype, right? Because this is dominant, this is dominant, so we'll have the dominant phenotype, even that plant. And what fraction of the offspring will have yellow fruit and dwarf vines? 0%. They are all red and tall, so none of them would have that phenotype. Okay, so last example here is question number 4 here. So in this case, this is a cross between two plants, similar to the one that Mendel had done, where basically you're testing two different characters. One is the color of the flowers, which can be either purple, which is dominant, or white, which is recessive. And the second character tested is the height of the stem, which can either be tall, which is dominant, or short, which is recessive. So now the question tells you that you're crossing two plants. With the first plant, what you're given is the phenotype in this case. So you have that the first plant, all we know is purple. Sorry, purple and tall. So it has both dominant phenotype. And this is crossed with a second plant. And in this case, you can infer the genotype. So this plant is purple. Plant number 2 is purple. So, and we know it's heterozygous for flower color. So it's heterozygous for purple and white there. And it's short. So by being short, we know short is carried by the recessive allele. So to be shown that it's short, it must be homozygous recessive for the second character. Great. Now the question is, it tells you what is the ratio of phenotype in the first filial generation, which is 50% purple and tall. And the other first 50%, so half, is purple and short. Now the question is, what is the genotype of this plant? How do you answer this? Is first of all, you got to figure out what possible genotype could give you that phenotype. There are different combinations you can get in there. It can be homozygous dominant for both. This plant will be purple and tall, or it could be heterozygous for one and not the other, or like this combination, they all give you purple and tall plants, or it could be heterozygous for both. That's the other possible combination. So these are the 4 possible genotype of plant number 1. And now what you gotta do, basically, theoretically at least, you have to do 4 different Punnett square against this plant and see which one gives you this ratio in terms of phenotypes. Now, I already wrote them, the 4 possibilities here. And theoretically, you can already exclude 2 of them. And the reason being that if you look at the phenotypes of the F1 generation here, you see the 50% have to show the short phenotype. So meaning that this plant to be short, there must be homozygous recessive for that character. So these already allow you to exclude the first 2 possibilities. Why? Because these plants here, for sure, in every gamete, you would have a dominant form of the allele for the height of the plant. And this one, all of them will give you a gamete with a recessive form. So crossing these 2, you would always get a heterozygous form of the plant. So which will be tall, will not be short. So meaning that this is not possible. Okay, so you can already exclude it. If you don't believe me, you can do the Punnett square for these 2. So now we're left to test this one right here, these 2 possible combinations. If you want, again, you can do the other 2 as well. But my reasoning is already narrowing down to these 2 possibilities there. So let's start with the first crossing here. P, capital P, short T, sorry, capital T, small t, cross with the plant that we already know the genotype of. So if this is true, we should get 50% purple tall, 50% purple and short. So possible gametes here. So this will be the parental, the possible gametes here. They would all carry the dominant form of the color of the flowers, and they could either have the dominant form for the height or the recessive form of the for the height. For these plants here, possible combination, this can go, this will be give you the same combination. So half of them will be purple allele and short allele, and the other half will be with this same combination there with both recessive form of the alleles. Okay, so let's test this hypothesis here with a Punnett square. So parent number one, or first hypothetical number one here, will give you, let's put it here, so possible combination, half capital capital, so dominant forms, half capital small. Parent number two here, so half and small half here. So what do you get from this combination here? So you will get 1/4 of the plants, so they're all half, so I'm gonna meet, I know it's each one of them is 1/4, so it will be homozygous dominant for the color, so purple and tall, purple and tall in terms of phenotype. These will be heterozygous for both purple and tall too, right? This plant here will be purple and heterozygous, so homozygous recessive, so short, purple and short. And this plant will be same thing, purple and short. So this plant 1 and 2 here will both be purple and tall. So it will be 1/4 plus 1/4, so 2/4, so 1.5. 50% of the plant will be purple and tall. This plant here and here will both be purple and short, 1.5, which is exactly the scenario is giving you. So it looks like these potentially could be. Now, scientifically, we cannot exclude the other possibility. The other one, yes, could be scientifically excluded based on the reasoning, the first two. Now, let's test the second hypothesis. So I'm gonna erase this first. Let's see if I can do it fast. What I'm gonna do, actually, I'm gonna exit and come back, discard it, and I'm gonna be. So we're back with the second possibility here. So we already exclude these two. This one gives, in fact, the phenotype that we are given by the question. Now let's test this, the last possibility here. Is this the genotype? Would that give us the same thing? Okay, so again, let's go through here, do the same reasoning. Heterozygous for both. Plant number one, is that true or not? Versus the second plant here. So possible gametes here. Now you have 4 possible combinations. So this can go with this or this. So you have both dominant form, one dominant or recessive, and vice versa. So each one of that will be 1/4 and 1/4. All right, so 1/4 of gametes like this, sorry, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. And for these, as before, you would have half of them with the dominant form of the color of the flowers and half of them with both recessive forms. So let's test this with a Punnett square. So in this case now, for convenience, for space, I'm going to put plant number 1 on this side, the gametes from plant number 1, and plant number 2 on this side, just for space. You can put them whatever way you want. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 there. And then so plant number 1. So you can have, so this will be 1/4, and then I'll meet from all the others. So like this, 1/4 like this, 1/4 like this, and 1/4 like this. Whereas in the other plant, so you would have half like this and half with both recessive form of the alleles. What combination do you get now? Now, these are all 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. So each combination will be 1 in 8. Okay, so I'm gonna omit 1 in 8. So we'll just write on the first one maybe. So you remember which one. Okay, so first one will be like this. This one will be like this, purple and tall. Purple and short, sorry. This will be heterozygous for both. These will be heterozygous for one and short. Purple and short. Now, these will be heterozygous for both. These will be heterozygous for one, but homozygous for the other one. This already gave away that this is not the correct answer here. This. Okay, so looking at the phenotypes, now we know this plant here will be purple and tall. Okay, so this type here. So we have, let's count them here. 1. These will be purple and short. 1 here. Let's put 1. This plant here, purple and tall. Where are 2? This plant here, purple and short. So far we're okay, 50-50, right? This plant here, purple and tall. Another one here. This plant right here, purple and short. We're good. However, we have a problem in Houston here. These last 2 plants. These actually will be white and tall, white and short. So, which means that basically, sorry, the computer just trying to log me out here. So anyways, I can go back, but the point is now you have some phenotypes that the question did not include, which is white and tall, which were not included before. And so this tells you that basically the only possibility was the third one in the list there. So the plants were homozygous dominant. Plant number 1 was homozygous dominant for the color of the flower and heterozygous for the height of the plant. All right, hopefully that helps you. I'm gonna stop here.